My name is Andres Buitron, and I would like to share my personal encounter in Vietnam. The United States was conscripting our youth at an alarming, rapid pace. By the time I graduated, nearly everyone was aware of acquaintances or relatives who were either in combat, injured, or deceased. Our ship underwent regular maintenance every 90 days in the Philippines. The sailors often described the 90 days at sea as a grueling experience and nicknamed our ship the White Prison. I too shared that sentiment and eagerly volunteered to join a working party in the city of Da Nang. Surprisingly, I cannot recall the specific task we performed, as we spent most of our time sitting in a bar, indulging in beer. Each of us was granted rest and recreation, R&R, allowing us to choose our desired destination. My friend, Mike Medina, and I decided to visit Japan. At one point, we unintentionally wandered into a non-touristic village where no one spoke English. Our hunger led us to an outdoor restaurant with no English menu. The server made a recommendation, to which we simply nodded in agreement. Since we weren't fond of raw fish, we paid for the meal and left. Eventually, we managed to find our way back to civilization. That night, a Japanese woman guided me to a place and offered me a drink, unaware that it would render me unconscious. When I woke up in the morning, I realized she had taken my money. Fortunately, I had diligently followed the advice of hiding money in various places, like my socks, so I had enough funds to return to the ship. My comrade Gilbert Diaz sustained injury from an enemy hand grenade. Lucio Gonzalez, another companion, returned from Vietnam only to meet his demise at the hands of a drunk driver 2 weeks later. Following the completion of my boot camp training, I was giving orders for Vietnam. Upon my departure, I was informed that 2 of my acquaintances, Jose Garcia and Betty Matias, returned home in coffins. Upon our arrival at the Da Nang Air Force Base, we were transported in a cattle truck. The driver, with a smirk on his face, deliberately directed the truck towards civilians on motorcoolers, causing them to tumble into ditches. I found this act to be inhumane, as they were not our enemies. I pondered on the thought of our country being invaded by military forces and being subjected to such brutality and disregard for human life. Witnessing numerous injustice, I came to realize that such is the nature of war. We transported many wounded and deceased soldiers, uploading them from the chopper pad to the hospital wards. The sight of young men with missing limbs, burnt bodies, and disfigured faces never ceased to disturb me. Even those who appeared physically unharmed returned home mentally scarred. My friend, Albert Segura, was one such individual. Succumbing to the effects of Agent Orange years later. They say men do not shed tears, but that is far from the truth. Christmas time in Vietnam marked the saddest and most prolonged period of my life. All the sailors aboard the ship were provided with instructions regarding the regulations on liberty. Among these rules, it was emphasized that they should remain on the main street, as any other location was strictly off limits. However, one of the individuals, known as Texan, decided to disregard this rule and proceeded to urinate in one of the alleys. Despite our attempts to dissuade him, he persisted and carried out the act. Unfortunately, the shore patrol arrived just in time to witness the incident and subsequently apprehended all of us in the alley, leading to our arrest. Consequently, we were confined in the brig of the ship. Shortly thereafter, we were summoned to stand before the captain, who promptly revoked our liberty privileges for the remainder of the week. As a result, I chose to venture out on liberty alone. From that day onward, I adopted civilian attire to blend in with the locals.
I have a lot of fond memories of my mother. When I was in Vietnam, she'd write to me practically every day. I'd get 2 or 3 letters in the mail every week. And she would also send some goodies. One time she sent some tortillas and frijoles and papitas, and she sent a lot. And I was able to share it with my friends from the Valle. They were Juan Moreno, and I was able to record him, and he gave thanks to my mom and told her how good those tortillas were, and they were so good. Even though they were shipped that far away, it was so good.
Seaman Pursley and I were spending time together at a bar in the Philippines. It seemed like he was quite bored as he ended up falling asleep with his head resting on the table. As the shore patrol officers were approaching our table to apprehend him, I urgently called out to him in an attempt to wake him up before they reached us. Despite my efforts, he remained unresponsive, prompting me to give him a firm slap in order to arouse him just as the shore patrol closed in on us. Fortunately, my quick action successfully prevented his arrest. He later expressed his gratitude to me for rescuing him from being taken to the brig. One of the sailors proudly displayed a picture of his lovely wife to us. Unfortunately, he received a heartbreaking Dear John letter one day, which left him devastated. Unable to cope with the pain, he resorted to taking a handful of Dorban bills, an opiate narcotic. As a result, he was discharged from the ship and ended up in a vegetative state. We visited the China Sea to swim and enjoy hamburgers. Unfortunately, I accidentally dropped my dog tags in the sea while swimming and could never find them. The hamburgers turned out to be disappointing. It was just a bun and a questionable meat patty. Despite the lackluster meal, we made the most of our time away from that white prison. The mind is often negatively impacted by the harsh realities of war, as it becomes difficult to come to terms with and understand certain incidents. In one instance, a sailor lost his sanity and to catch multiple bags containing bodies, throwing them into the sea. Subsequently, a distressed call of "Man overboard" echoed through the loudspeaker. We proceeded to recover the bodies from the ocean, but were never informed about the fate of the individual responsible for this tragic act. I encountered several intriguing individuals, but one in particular stood out. Boatswain Mate First Class Launch, a Native American. Despite his quiet demeanor, his actions commanded respect. One night, when the lights were turned off at bedtime, a sailor switched them back on. Without a word, Lawrence retrieved a baseball bat from under his bed, held it up with a stern expression, and turned off the lights again. After that incident, the lights remained off throughout the night. I considered myself extremely fortunate to have had the opportunity to utilize the two-way radio all the way from the seas of Vietnam to my mother's residence in Austin, Texas. It truly felt like a miraculous feat to be able to communicate with my family from such a distant location. Our conversations followed a pattern where I would speak, then say over, and they would respond repeating the same process. However, at one point when I started speaking in Spanish, the person monitoring the call advised me against it. I inferred that this restriction might have been due to security concerns. Nonetheless, I managed to capture our conversation on recording, making it one of the most exhilarating experiences of my life. During my service in Vietnam, I had the pleasure of reuniting with an old high school friend, Vernon Cartwright. He was brought aboard our ship for medical attention, and upon seeing each other, we spent a wonderful time reminiscing and exchanging stories. Unfortunately, a devastating fire at the National Personnel Records Center on July 12, 1973, destroyed millions of military files, including Vernon's. Despite his struggles to prove his service in Vietnam to his superiors, our chance encounter on the hospital ship allowed me to vouch for him when we returned to the United States. I wrote a letter to the commanding officer attesting to our shared experience in Vietnam. Refueling while the ship is in motion is considered the most perilous task on board. The process involves a series of precise steps that must be followed diligently, as any deviation can result in fatal consequences for the sailors involved. I personally experienced a close call during this operation, along with another sailor. We were responsible for handling the winch, which involves wrapping the line 3 times to establish connection between the two ships. Adhering to the correct procedure, we executed our task meticulously. However, a potentially disastrous incident occurred when the petty officer in charge instructed another sailor at a different winch to wrap the line only twice. As a result, the line whipped out of the winch with great force, narrowly missing our feet and almost dragging us into the treacherous waters. We were fortunate enough to react swiftly and jumped away from the imminent danger. The water between the ships resembles a powerful river, exaggerated by the Ventura effect. It possesses a strong suction force that can easily pull you under. Once submerged underneath the ship, one is confronted with a perilous rudder and the risk of getting trapped in the intakes located beneath the vessel. These intakes draw in seawater to power various machinery on board. Unfortunately, we later discovered that a sailor had lost their life under the supervision of the same petty officer. This incident serves as a stark reminder of the inherent dangers associated with refueling operations while the ship is underway. It underscores the critical importance of adhering to the strict protocols and ensuring that every sailor involved is well trained and aware of the potential risk involved. Safety must always remain the utmost priority in such hazardous circumstances. The cuisine aboard the vessel was exceptional, offering a wide array of dishes not typically found at home. At home, the usual fare consisted of beans, rice, tortillas, and a modest amount of beef and chicken. Due to my father's unfortunate incident with fish bones, I had never ventured into seafood territory. However, I discovered that salmon and lobster quickly became my favorites. The ship boasted skilled chefs who provided us with 4 delicious meals daily. Despite encountering rough seas that caused even the massive ship to sway, I only experienced seasickness once throughout the entire year. The Marines on board were not as fortunate, as many succumbed to vomiting on the deck. Following the advice to eat crackers, I managed to navigate through the rough waters without getting sick. In the recruitment office, the recruiter made a promise that if I enlisted in the Navy, I would have the opportunity to attend Navy Class A Service School Command, specifically the Data Processing Technician program in San Diego, California. This was back in 1969, and I was captivated by the potential of this emerging technology, fueling my desire to pursue a career in this field. Interestingly, I had already been introduced to it during my final 2 years of high school, and I found the course to be quite intuitive, allowing me to excel in it effortlessly. With great determination, I committed myself to the Navy and was promptly deployed to Vietnam after completing boot camp. Following 9 months of serving as a deckhand, I was reassigned to the Chief Petty Officer's quarters, where I had the opportunity to interact with them. I shared my aspirations with one of the officers, who advised me to read the book associated with the course and assured me that he would write a letter of recommendation to support my application for the school. Consequently, my next set of orders directed me to San Diego, where I would attend the prestigious school. Seaman Miller and I developed a strong friendship. He possessed remarkable intelligence and an extensive understanding of rockets and other scientific projects. Our next assignment led us to San Diego for training school, as San Diego was his hometown. He owned a brand new VW, and we would often drive along the coast on weekends in search of California girls. One day, while on the beach, 2 girls approached us and invited us to a party later that night. Upon entering the party, we were offered a pill, which he promptly advised me to discard. He later explained that it was LSD, and even keeping it in our pockets could result in the chemicals seeping into our bodies. The atmosphere of the party was psychedelic, and many individuals exhibited peculiar behavior after consuming drugs. Unfortunately, someone secretly slipped a drug into Miller's drink, of which he remained unaware. That particular night, he experienced sleeplessness and extreme distress. He was never the same after that incident, as the drug had severely affected him. Following my discharge, I endeavored to establish contact with the individuals we had conversed with during our time on the ship. Surprisingly, only 3 evenings in Austin resulted in successful connections. These individuals were Vernon Cartwright and Ken Robinson, both of whom attended the same high school as me. The third person was Lieutenant Armstrong, whom my wife and I unexpectedly encountered at one of the department stores on Brody Lane. I took the opportunity to introduce him to my wife, and we engaged in a pleasant conversation for a while. However, it was at Seton Hospital on one fateful day that I stumbled upon his photograph displayed in the hallway among the other esteemed doctors. During a 1-year tour in Vietnam, many of us had a calendar to mark the days until our return to the States. On our ship, we had a designated area called the HEO deck. Once our tour was over, we were transported by HEO to the main naval base, where we underwent processing. However, that one night around 2 p.m., the siren began blaring, indicating that enemy bugs were dangerously close to our sleeping quarters. We hurriedly sought shelter in a bunker, but upon my arrival there was no space for rest for me or others. Fear gripped my mind as I contemplated the possibility of not making it home. Eventually the sirens stopped, and we were instructed to return to our beds. However, just an hour later the sirens started again. Without hesitation, I leaped from my top bunk, accidentally landed on a fellow soldier, and sprinted toward the shelter. This time, I managed to enter before it became overcrowded. That night was the most terrifying experience of my entire tour. Reflecting in my time in Nam, I have come to the understanding that God's grace and blessings were with me. Many of our youth faced struggles in various aspects of their lives. Throughout my entire tour, I felt God's protection surrounding me. Moreover, He listened to the prayers of my loved ones.